David Gilmour is one of the greatest and biggest guitar heroes of all time. And when it comes to John Mayer's influences, he's not someone, though, that you'd think of as being kind of the forefront of that list. You think of Stevie Ray Vaughan, Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, to name a few. But today I wanted to discuss one time when John really embraced his inner David Gilmour. And this performance, I think, is just absolutely spectacular. The solo is fantastic. The tones definitely, I think, are underrated when it comes to when you discuss John Mayer's greatest tones throughout the years. This one, I think, is up there for sure. And overall, the performance is just such a great tribute to Pink Floyd and David Gilmour. So we are talking about today when John Mayer and Zac Brown Band covered Comfortably Numb at the Southern Ground Music and Food Festival on October 21st of 2012. This performance is just absolutely amazing. It's really fantastic. So let's take a listen to John's first solo from the performance. All right, with that first solo done, I thought this would be a good time to interject and talk about the gear that John is using before we go into the second solo and kind of the bigger outro solo that John does as part of this performance. Now, this overall rig is one that we've seen John actually use before, but this is kind of a precursor to another performance that's one of my other favorite Meritones of all time. That's Going Down with the Rolling Stones in December of the same year, 2012. So this is kind of the exact same rig, more or less, that John uses, it looks like, and then he brings to that performance also, which makes me really love the board and this rig setup even more because it's consistently showing up with really amazing tones. The guitar that John is using is his Fender Custom Shop Prototype Monterey Pop Stratocaster, just a very well-known guitar in the John Mayer gear space. You know, you watch Where the Light Is, for example, you see this guitar lots throughout that live recording during the Continuum tour. And this guitar, most kind of famously as well, John actually had the fretboard replaced and it has Brazilian rosewood on it now. That's one kind of upgrade that John had done after he acquired this specific guitar. So just a cool thing to note about the Monterey Pop Stratocaster. It's just one of John's, I think, best sounding strats ever, in my personal opinion. Now, luckily, we have some really amazing side stage footage for most of the first solo and some of the performance after that solo as well, where when the lighting kind of is being cooperative, I was able to grab a screenshot and take a look at the pedal board that John was using. And from what we can tell here, it appears to be absolutely identical to the one that John was using for Going Down with the Rolling Stones about a month and a half after this performance. So basically the exact same rig John kind of transported with them. Of course, for Going Down with the Rolling Stones, however, John used the black one, not the Monterey Pop Stratocaster, which is kind of an interesting thing. I almost feel like for a Pink Floyd kind of cover, David Gilmour thing, a black Strat, like the black one kind of makes the bit of sense in that instance. That's just a kind of an interesting choice that John went with the Monterey instead of the black one, which I think would have been very fitting as well for this performance. But I digress. So the pedal board that John had for the Going Down with the Rolling Stones performance, and like I said, from everything I can tell from this angle, it's identical to the one that John had used previously for the Comfortably Numb cover, is an Ernie Ball Volume Pedal Junior, followed by a Boss TU3, followed by the Keeley Katana version 1. Then we have the Ibanez TS10 into the Klon Centaur. So this is a case of TS10 into Klon Centaur for the overdrive gain stacking combination here, which is, definitely a thing to note for the tones for this performance. Then we have the Way Huge Octopus Mark 1 AP2 version, followed by the Pete Cornish TES, and then the Strymon Lex. All right, and when it comes to this pedal board, there are a few things that I want to mention and quickly discuss here. The first thing, which I kind of just mentioned, is how this is an example of the TS10 into the Klon Centaur. When I've gotten tones with a TS10 and a real Klon Centaur, I always preferred personally, in my personal experience, the tones in my room here of the TS10 into the Klon Centaur. I find that the TS10 doesn't quite have as much headroom to it, obviously, and the Klon just kind of shines with the gain a little bit higher up even than, what John has used it for. But I've personally just really enjoyed those tones in my own experience of pushing the Klon with the TS10 or a different tube screamer. So this just to me is another highlight example of, for me in my personal case, I've been one who kind of has just, even through my ears and examples I've found over the years, of being someone who personally prefers it when John goes TS10 into Klon Centaur. So that's just kind of a topic that always, you see in the John Mayer gear space in his tones. What order does John use? What is better, TS10 into Klon Centaur or Klon Centaur into TS10? I think it's all a matter of personal preference, but this is just another case in point for, the version that I kind of prefer myself. So that's just one thing kind of worth noting here about the pedal board. Now, the other thing in regard to John's pedal board specifically that I want to mention is something that's not really talked about a lot, but my friend the London guitarist was the first one to point it out because he's someone who very much knows David Gilmour's gear a lot as well. I'm nowhere near an expert on David Gilmour's sound and the gear he has used, but he kind of mentioned a while ago in our group chat that he has noticed a lot of kind of almost overlap between Mayer's gear and David Gilmour's gear, where David Gilmour might use something and then, a little later on you see John also using it, and just a lot of coincidences in that gear that John is using. Now, this definitely could just be a case of David Gilmour has a really fantastic ear, obviously, and knows really good gear when he finds it, and so does John. And it could just be, all completely coincidental. But one thing I thought that would be kind of cool to point out is the fact that when it comes to Pete Cornish pedals, for example, David Gilmour is one of kind of the people who is the best known for using Pete Cornish gear and pedals and, having actual boards and stuff built by Pete Cornish for him. The Pete Cornish TES being one of those things that David Gilmour has used, which John has also adopted. So when you listen to that solo performance and you listen to the delay, part of the reason why it sounds so good is because David Gilmour has also used a Pete Cornish TES in the past. So John's using one of those as well. So there's that instance of overlap on the pedal board specifically here. And it's also not just the Pete Cornish TS where you do see overlap between things that David Gilmour has used and things that John Mayer has used. Just to name a few, for example, the Pete Cornish SS2 and G2 David Gilmour has used quite a lot for different, distortion and overdrives. And then John also, during the Continuum era and a little bit during the 2017 Search for Everything tour as well, has used a duplex which contains an SS2 and G2 in it. So those pedals, you've seen some overlap. The T-Rex replica, there's also been overlap between David Gilmour and John Mayer, both using that delay pedal. Like I said, it also could just be they all know really great gear when they hear it and get to experiment with it, but it's just something I thought that was worth kind of mentioning and pointing out that, it's very possible that John is a bit more David Gilmour inspired than maybe a lot of us have kind of thought. And when we talk about his influences, there definitely is some, connection, it might seem like, between John and David Gilmour. It's just something I wanted to point out. And when it comes to the amps that John was using, again, this is really just a rig that I've always revisited when it comes to talking about some of my favorite tones or thinking of them. Then it's like, oh yeah, this is the rig that John always kind of consistently was using for a lot of at least my personal favorite tones. It's the Gilmour-Mayer signature along with Dumble Steel String Singer 002 in combination with an Alessandro cabinet for each amplifier. That rig aesthetically too, it's just a very good looking amp rig. Now when it comes to the speakers in the Alessandro cabinets, I've mentioned this before as well, but just to restate, when it's a rig like this, it's virtually impossible to actually know what John was using in terms of the speakers. Now, one thing that John was using a lot during the Born and Raised in Paradise Valley era, which is basically around this time here, is that John was using G1265s pretty religiously in terms of the actual amp rig. We know that he had 3 Alessandro cabs as part of the Born and Raised Paradise Valley tour that had G1265s in them, but then there also were Celestion Centuries, Celestion Golds, and Alessandro Neos also in the mix. So it's possible he could have been experimenting with this performance, or, for maybe some of the tones he was going for, change the speakers. But these were just different speakers that John would have been using at this time frame. Kind of the more common one, or the more frequently probably used one, at least included one pair of Celestion G1265s within the rig. But again, very impossible to tell, but those just give you some ideas as to what John might have been using for this performance. So that overall is the rig that John was using for this performance, and now let's take a listen to this really awesome outro solo that he does.
John Mayer!
I just think this performance is really cool, and to hear John covering Comfortably Numb in this way with Zac Brown Band, which they sounded absolutely fantastic as well, it's just really awesome, and especially because of that, you know, there seems to be that little bit of a connection between some gear that David Gilmour has used, and then you see John using it as well. It's kind of like, okay, I wonder if John is a bit more inspired by David Gilmour than maybe we've all kind of thought, and in this context here, I thought it'd be really cool to talk about. This is a performance, too, that came out a long time ago in 2012, but I've never really, I don't think, listened to it. I don't think I even had discovered it until decently recently, and it's one I've been coming back to and listening to and have thought, okay, this is just really cool and really great sounding, so definitely a video I wanted to make on the channel, and I really like John's playing throughout this too. You know, it's to get up and perform such an iconic guitar song in front of a crowd like that, which John obviously, you know, doesn't cover Comfortably Numb or any Pink Floyd, you know, really ever, for him to go up there and do something that, you know, is a little bit of his own thing at times, and then you hear, you know, the iconic lines of Comfortably Numb as well in there. I just thought it was really cool and just overall really well done, and the Zac Brown Band as well sounded so fantastic. They're absolutely unreal too. So this is just one of those cases where I was like, all right, this is definitely a topic worth discussing. Maybe it could be a cool video to actually dive a little bit deeper into the David Gilmour and Mayer connection to try and see what else I can come up with, maybe with the help of my friend the London guitarist, because he knows a lot more about this stuff than I do. But either way, just a really great performance that I wanted to highlight on the channel. And, you know, it's not often you actually hear John covering such an iconic song like this, and just the tones, the playing, and everything I thought personally was fantastic, and a highlight that I wanted to share with you guys. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments down below if you've noticed any other kind of gear connections between David Gilmour and John Mayer. It'd be kind of cool to maybe, you know, stumble upon something else or anything. But until the next video, you guys, thanks so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one.
Anyway, go ahead and click the subscribe button if you like what you see.